Well, I'm Santy Torrez. I think the people that's connected, I think, know almost a big part of them. So not much introduction needed. Been highlighting for over 4 years, and since 4 or 5 years, I've been working almost exclusively with stitching. Uh, and everything is teaching related, like a very niche part of this Slackline world. As a background, I can say that I did a little bit of collaboration with the ISA, maybe. I guess Thomas can agree. And work with the Slackline brand, the Slacktivity, getting some ISA certifications, etc, etc, and the development, or like, for example, the pillow trick zone setups that's the activity is working on. So let's start. I was thinking of making a little bit of an intro. I think it's interesting to think of how was the Slackline world before all this stitching madness started. Like the time where we didn't have loops, or we had loops and we were not using it. There was always two weblogs in the system. We couldn't connect different lines. If you had an 80 meter and you wanted to rig a 100 meter, you needed to buy a new webbing. Then you had 150 and you wanted to rig a 170, you needed to buy a new webbing. So definitely all the stitching changed the way that we can use our gear. And in this pre-stitching time, we had limitations lengthwise, because you couldn't go much longer. Well, you could, but safety-wise, it was not the wisest thing to do to rig a 300 meter without fractions, like the first K that was done in France with zero fraction, in which even the people that was walking knew that the backup was useless. And special thanks, I would say, to Balance Community and Slack Affair, that were the pioneers with all this stitched work, and I started moving this thing forward. So, what's the current state with all the stitching? Like now, I think almost everyone that has a line has some loops on it. It's getting widespread. The fractioning of lines, like having your lines properly segmented at a reasonable distance to have a safe setup. It's also getting more and more common having segmented lines, having your 50, 100, 60, whatever meter pieces that you just can connect and disconnect and add to each other, which adds safety, and it makes it way more handy to deal with this. So yeah, it's the last three years of slacklining, I completely changed the panorama. And so for the futures of stitching, there's a lot of brainstorming. It's nothing like 100% down. That's why I call it kind of the future thing. But I see two main kind of disciplines of slackline that it can have a big improvement on the future. I'm going to start for long high lines. I'd say that what I think it can be the future for long high lines is the having your main and backup stitched all the way at regular or irregular intervals, and you can get to the point where you switch all the tapes for stitching, which has multiple advantages and I would say little disadvantages, but I'm going to go through it. So one key point for why doing this is that you don't have tapes anymore, and all that this implies. So you're not wasting a lot of plastic, you're not dropping tapes around, tapes are not breaking, making huge loops and making the lines a mess, which personally bugs me a lot. You have a big improvement in safety of the system, because even if you have weaker stitches, in the event of a backup fault, for example, the line, the forces that the line get, they are really reduced. So it changes the way that the whole system is working. In a Yeah, it's a big improvement. Also, if you have this kind of setup that's stitched all the way in main with backup, you don't have any more problems with the wind. You can get a 70 km/h wind, and if you have a stitching that's properly done, you're not gonna have issues. I don't know if you need to go to 300 km/h to maybe damage the line. So, for example, for very big projects, I don't know, I would say like over 500, 600, 1K, if you have it stitched all the way, you have less concerns with the wind. You have concerns with electricity and other stuff, but you don't have the fear that your line is getting detaped. I know that the last world record, the 2.7, was done like this. I personally stitched like 800, 900 meters of that setup. And I know I have the testimony of one of the people walking that they told me if the line was not stitched that way, every 12 meters, I think almost all of the setup was done, they would not have gone into the line. And okay, I would imagine there's a little bit the concern that the backup gets tight at some point. I think if the measuring it's properly done and you have the right numbers, right tensions, etc., it shouldn't be a problem. And even it has the potential, depending how the stitching and the fractioning or splitting is done, you don't need to do a fractioning to individualize the system in the connections from webbing to webbing. You could, I don't know, for example, if you have a 50-meter piece, make a strong stitching in the middle and connect it with your next 50-meter piece. So the split goes from the middle of one section to the middle of one section, and the connection in between the lines, you just can put a quick link and for the main and another one for backup, which makes it way cleaner, nicer for the rings, faster to do. Yeah, maybe it has the potential to not do splits anymore. What are the disadvantages of having a setup like this with your main and backup stitched all the way? If you put these segments into the web block, it's going to be a hassle. Each time that when you're tensioning, you will need to soft point to overtake the stitching, put it back in the web block, tension again. And if it's a long line, this will have to be done many times. So it really doesn't make sense to have one of these segments for the anchor. It's kind of the idea of what Feeling was referring to. Maybe it's good to have your segments of high-tech webbing with this kind of setup all the way until the last section where it's going to the web block, just having a normal line, probably a low tech that's easy to manipulate, and you don't need to jump over any stitching. Also, the disadvantage of having stitched all the way is that you don't have the ability to pull the backup to twist the line. For me personally, I don't think it's a big problem, but I know some people really don't like that. And another problem would be if you get your main and backup damaged, it's a little bit more tricky because it's setups that are more expensive and a little bit more, well, you need to be more careful with it. I mean, you can always get it repaired, but you cannot, if you damage your main, you cannot take the main out and put another one and keep the backup. You will need to have your setup fixed. Okay, let's continue. that was a little bit my idea for long highlines. I think on the very, in the freestyle world that's getting quite strong right now, there's a bunch of improvements that can be done. So, as I said in the intro, Slack TV introduced these pillow setups, which the idea is that you have your main line, the one that gives you the stretch on the sides, and on the middle you have a stitched part around 4 to 5 meters that it's a way more sturdy webbing, that it's more comfortable, it's stronger, and it resists better the abrasion. So I think this has the potential to become more and more common, even though we have the trick zones list and similar. The feeling is the comfort of the line makes a big difference when you have a big heavy webbing in the middle. So,
Santy,
yes?
we're having some interference with your microphone. Maybe you can just plug it and unplug it again or something.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's
Hello?
better.
You...
Much better.
Okay. Should I repeat something, or it's kind of good so far?
It was like the last 3-4 sentences, which were not so clear.
Okay. So, I don't remember what I said last sentences. Yeah, that in general, I think that this kind of setup with a stronger line in the middle has the potential to become more mainstream. Another point, an idea that I've been having lately that I really would like to work on is the modularization of freestyle setups. So in this idea, you have 3 segments, and it's related with the one I just talked. You have 3 very differentiated zones in your line. You have your main line that gives you the stretch, let's say, leaving aside bungees and not related. You have your main line that gives you the stretch. You have your trick zone, and then you have your backup. So the way that I would approach this idea is heading for a long-lasting backup, something high-tech like Dyneema, Vectran, or similar, and making it in a way that you can interconnect the segments in a way that you can exchange it. That would mean that when your mine is old or it gets damaged, you can connect and disconnect, let's say, the first 30 meters of your line and the other 50, like getting into account the stretch. It's something like this what you will need. So when your main gets old or damaged, you could just disconnect this webbing, connect a new one, and keep your trick zone and your backup. It gives you the possibility of keeping your backup. You can switch all the main system and having a backup for multiple lines. The only if that's needed to know there is if you have a high-tech backup that has little stretch, it needs to be split, it needs to be fractioned. And it gives you the possibility, for example, if your trick zone is damaged, you can switch it for another one and keep the rest of the system. This is an idea that I haven't fully put in practice now, but I think it's coming next month. And some weeks ago, there was the freestyle Fortress Freestyle Festival in the north of France. It was a good place to share ideas. I think there's Josh around in the conversation also that we were speaking about. The possibility to go back to Dyneema rope as a backup, as they were doing many, many years ago. It has some advantages. For example, that it's cheaper than Dyneema webbing or a high modulus polyethylene webbing. It's easy to splice at home. Like, it doesn't take a degree to make a Brummel splice or a Whoopi kind of loop. It's better with the wind, which, freestylers are a little bit picky with their setups and their conditions. And if it's a little bit wind, the line is surfing, so having a rope backup takes some resistance off of the system. It's super easy to adjust your backup length. And this is mainly focused for very high performance setups because the weight is very low. If you go for a 6mm backup, which is over 3 tons of strength, we're talking around 15 to 17 grams. The disadvantages, which are not small, is the interactions between webbing and rope. We all know this from the old years when Dyneema was used as backup, when rope was used as backup, and the problem is that the contact surface of rope with webbing is way smaller, and if you have twist, if the backup gets pulled, if you leash fall over the backup and it pulls it, it has the potential to make some burning marks. That's the most concerning for me. After that, we have homemade manipulations on the gear, like making a Brummel splice. It's not rocket science, but even though it's easy, need to trust that the person that does it properly. We have also the characteristic that these high-tech lines usually are, that the Dyneema rope, it's very static. So as I said before, if you had this rope backup, this Dyneema rope backup, it would need to be split. So you have the other segment of the main that didn't fail has the potential to absorb your fall, because if you had a full backup fall on Dyneema, probably you're gonna break in two at least. And in the event of a backup fall, there's also the incognita of what you're doing, how you're rolling out. I mean, this is not a big problem, but moving around a 6mm rope is not the ideal scenario, I would think. And with that, I think that's mostly all. If anyone has some questions. Like, yeah, of course, he's saying that he's doing that with Dura La Vida and Dynamite Pro and X-Wing, but I mean, it's the same thing that Slacktivity is doing with PinkTube, LSD, Y2K setups. So I don't think that's a question.
I have a question. You mentioned about using the Dyneema rope as backup in freestyle lines. How do you what do you do in the splitting part? Like you have two Brummel splices that connect to a quick link, or like you do a knot? Like I don't think you do a knot.
Okay, Arda. So as I told you, this is a little bit theoretical. I haven't put it in practice yet, but you have the potential to do this in multiple ways. You could have a fracture kind of stitching. The fracture is when you have the mainline and you have one loop, you have two loops facing each other. So you could have two segments of Dyneema with Brummel splices and just connect all 4 loops in there with a quick link, with a soft shackle. It depends on your taste. Another option would be to have your main line connected with loops and make a 4-loop connection kind of thing. And yeah, definitely I would not recommend knots at all in Dyneema. I think there's way cleaner, stronger, and nicer solutions to it.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, you kind of already started the discussion by saying you would like to see some development within freestyle. high lines and how they are constructed in general. I mean, we have this new type of freestyle highline now, short ones with bungees in the anchors. You already started saying, okay, why not go back to ropes because of the wind? Is there anything to say about like even getting rid of a part of the line in the main line and like switching maybe the stretchy part out with something else, maybe not bungees, but something completely different, maybe even also ropes of some kind? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, sure thing. I think this is very Yoshi Yoshi thing. As I said in the F Cube, we were like brainstorming a little bit. He was suggesting having main and backup of Dynamo rope at 5 meter, like your trick zone in webbing, and then having the bungees. That's an option. I don't know if I would consider that the slackline. It's there's the point where I think maybe we start diverging and creating just a new thing that's just for bouncing. You can walk it, but I think everyone will be very glad to not do that. So certainly it's a possibility. It's a system that can work. Like bungees are proving to be really good for freestyle. They're opening a lot of possibilities, allowing you to do things that it was not possible or even thinkable in a 30-meter line before. So definitely there's a big window opening there. About putting Dyneema, like, yeah, sure, why not? If I will call it a slackline, there, I think.
I mean, for example, this development for me already took place in the rodeo lining, right? So adding like Dyneema to the line and just have like a middle surf zone in big rodeo lines. At some point in rodeo lining, your surf is so big that the webbing itself acts as a sail and stops your surf again. So this totally makes sense for bigger rodeo lines, like also in indoor places that we have, just have like two Dyneema ropes connected in the middle with a surf zone. But this, I think, actually makes a huge difference there in that case. So why not for freestyle highline? I totally see that as the next step that probably is going to happen, that we might have bungees and Dyneema rope and the freestyle.
Yeah, sure thing. Like, I think there's a lot of potential to expand it that way. I didn't include it in mine because it was more like stitching related, more than freestyle setup related. But yeah,
I think stitching will be, part of that. You still need the trick zone. You probably have some stitching going on near the anchors as well.
Yeah.
And I think rescue scenarios are also are doable. We're talking about 70-meter lines, so you can rescue in several different ways. Just need a rope, and you can go out not with a hangover, but with a normal rope. I think it's totally doable.
Oh, sure.
Big deal.
Sure. I will be very curious to start seeing those setups around.
Yeah, as Stefan just mentioned in the comments, you need additional tools. So an extra rope for sure, and usually you can repel the person from the middle, so no big deal. You don't even need to go to the anchors. And if so, you can plan for that. Yeah. Well, could you take the... Sorry, I had to get the coffee off the stove. Okay. Any other questions for Santy?
I guess we're done then.
Thanks a lot for this for the different interesting thoughts you brought into this. Very interesting. Let's see where this heads. We'll continue the talk in a year. See where we are by then.
Well, I think it's already starting. I'm already talking with some friends to maybe try this waving main, but the Nemo backup thing to see how it goes. And in the long high lines, I've done already some setups that are main and backup fully stitched, even at irregular intervals, to avoid resonance. For example, 100-meter sections with the strong stitches at 25 every 25 meters, but having 5 meters, 7 meters, 11 meters, 8 meters at just irregular intervals to avoid. Miss the word right now. Resonance of the line when you walk. So I've done some setups like that already. The people I did it for, they are super happy with it, and I think that for sure has the potential to dig in with time.